On today's episode,
we should remember that free speech is not just about the ability to stand on a street corner or get on the internet or some TV show or whatever and have a big audience and speak to crowds. Freedom of speech is just as much about the conversations that we have with just one person or a few people. Frankly, those are often the ones that actually make a difference, because this is face-to-face, the chance to give and take, a chance to explain this is why this is important to me in a different way. Welcome to the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Our world today presents people with complicated issues of life and death, marriage and family, health and science. It can be a struggle to understand or deal with them. We're here to help by bringing good information and a fresh biblical perspective to these matters and more. Join us now for Life Challenges.
hi, and welcome back. I'm Krista Potratz, and I'm here today with Pastors Bob Fleischman and Jeff Samuelson. And today we are going to talk about free speech. Part of the reason, or probably a very large part of the reason we're going to be talking about this topic, is because it has been very related to a lot of current events and things going on. Specifically, I would think like to the Charlie Kirk assassination. There was so much that came out with that. It's honestly still going out with all of that too. We just thought it would be really good to just talk about, again, what free speech is and how, as Christians too, we can think about our free speech and use that to glorify God. Where we want to maybe start just today is talking about what is free speech and what are some maybe common misconceptions about what it protects and what it doesn't protect.
It should be pretty easy to define and understand. Should be. Free speech is being free to speak whatever it is you have to say.
Sounds great. Episode over.
Yeah. It is a right. It is a form of liberty. I am free to do this. But there's always going to be a but when you start off saying, it should be. It's not a freedom from consequences when you do speak. It's not uncommon for someone to speak his mind, get in trouble for it, and then claim, oh no, that's really unjust. I was just exercising my freedom of speech. When in reality, he's simply facing the consequences for freely speaking his mind. He said something that offended somebody. He said something that got him in trouble. And very often the trouble that he's in is in the form of other people speaking their minds, saying, I don't like what you have to say. Another thing that requires a bit of fine-tuning on our understanding of free speech is that it is generally understood that freedom of speech is not an absolute right to say absolutely anything. We do put guardrails on it, because the reckless disregard for other people's safety that would be shouting fire in a crowded theater and creating a riot in which people could get injured and such. That's something just about everyone is comfortable saying, no, we should restrict that. That should not be something people are allowed to do. And similarly, we at least tolerate, if not encourage, laws that criminalize words that are spoken to do something wrong, to incite violence or to destroy someone's reputation. We're comfortable restricting the freedom of speech in instances like that because there's concrete harm to other people that is resulting from that, or perhaps to society as a whole. I believe it was Oliver Wendell Holmes, I might be getting the person wrong, but said something to the effect of, your right to swing your fist ends at my nose. And that's related to free speech in that once you cause harm by what you say, deliberate, conscious harm, that has gone too far.
The problem with the free speech doctrine is that it challenges your internal moral compass, I suppose, and Christians operate in it from a different set of standards. Christians are concerned about what's our primary concern for free speech? We want to be able to talk about Jesus. And so as a result, we tend to compromise and say, well, we're willing to put up with hateful speech or bad speech and slanderous speech, swearing speech, that kind of stuff, so long as it protects our right to share the gospel and to worship God and so forth. And the First Amendment, free speech, gets gets twisted and turned by who's ever controlling the microphone, really. I did a kind of a deep dive into what legal scholars have said about free speech over the years. And it definitely is viewed differently today than it was 20, 30 years ago. And it was viewed differently then than it was a century before that. There are some who have argued that free speech should always be, you're free to speak as long as it's for the betterment of society. Well, even then, who decides what's for the betterment of society?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you kind of touched a little bit, Bob, on free speech and with religion, too. And that is one of the things we wanted to talk about, also about how free speech and freedom of religion are connected, especially in the way Christians express their beliefs publicly.
Here in the United States, the right to free speech and the right to freedom of religion, they're put together in the First Amendment to the Constitution. It's fundamental in the Bill of Rights there. And so we're very used to it. It's very American. And there's actually some danger in that because being American Christians, we sometimes think that, oh yeah, our understanding of freedom of speech, that must be in the Bible, right? Like, well, there are certain things that support that and maybe inspire that or whatever, but we can't necessarily equate what is American in regard to freedom of speech with what is Christian. And it's just something it's good to be aware of. But since Christianity is a faith that is all about speaking, we speak the gospel, we speak the truth, we speak it in love, it would be difficult to say we have freedom of religion if we don't also have freedom of speech. It's kind of an essential kind of thing. I'll just say a country I'm familiar with, not the United States, has what appears to be a very robust freedom of religion, judging by the variety of religions that are present there and that mostly function without any kind of government interference or anything like that. But the law there actually and actively restricts their ability to speak publicly to people who aren't already connected to their religion. And this means that Christians in particular are not as free to express their faith and carry out the Great Commission as they would like to, as they have been called to do. So that's a case where lacking a full freedom of speech does affect their ability as Christians to freely practice their religion.
I'm going to read the First Amendment. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So that's the First Amendment. And if you think about it, it's sufficiently vague. So Christians, I think it does well for Christians to robustly support the freedom of speech. We've got a dear friend who's like a daughter, really, to us, who lives in China, and we've had her on the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jolie.
She's talked about how at their church they're not permitted to evangelize. They cannot evangelize, and they cannot proselytize. They can do their work with their people, only with their people. And of course, that's a problem because the Great Commission calls for us to go to all people and share it. And so it presents unique challenges. So Christians will want to look for as much freedom as they can. The problem that we have is what you have to put up with in order to get it, because there are people who do not believe in a God who will form nonprofits for the specific purpose to get away with some of the freedoms that religion has. Some of these nonprofits are formed for sexual reasons. Some of these nonprofits are formed for other cultural reasons to try to change the culture and so forth. And they sometimes form directly in opposition to Christianity under that broad umbrella of freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And this almost seems like old-fashioned now, but where this used to come up a lot was where the freedom of religion and freedom of speech seemed to clash is when you would have your small-town USA, you have your nativity creche downtown, the wise men and the manger and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, the Americans United for Separation of Church and State come in and say, we find that as a violation of the separation of church and state, which is a whole other topic. Then under freedom of speech, people say, well, then we should be able to put in the menorah for Jewish religion. And then it starts expanding. And then the Satanists want something and the Wiccans want something. And you've got all of these others. And of course, Christians find themselves having to tolerate it because you want to still be able to talk about Jesus.
Bob, you kind of talked a little bit about how our cultural understanding of free speech has changed over time. And I think we've even seen that more too in the rise with cancel culture and especially other forms of social media as well. And so how has this cultural understanding shifted with all of these things that we've been exposed to?
For a long time, and I'd say historically, the focus was on being free to speak without government restriction or interference. And that's basically the language of the First Amendment. The government shall not do this. But these days, the question, are we free to speak, isn't asked so much about the state as it is about other people and the culture and its institutions in the academy, universities, on social media, on TV. It's like, if I speak freely, am I going to pay for it? And if you are going to pay for it, for speaking freely, are you really free to speak? And that's why this is, I think that's a lot of why this has really become a hot button issue in our society, because people feel that, well, yeah, I've got this right, but what good is a right if I express it and I still suffer consequences for it that are strictly in regard to my having had the audacity to say something that somebody else didn't want to hear. And there's a lot of fear of being canceled or worse, or for simply advocating what you think and believe these days. Sometimes it's even for speaking truths that people find uncomfortable, that they just don't want to hear. There's nothing wrong about it. It's just that somebody doesn't want to hear it. And so they find a way to shut you down. Maybe it's shouting you down on campus if you're a speaker. Maybe it's getting you fired from your job for something that you said, expressing an opinion. And it is concerning because it is a restriction of what used to be robust freedom of speech, and it's fear that's driving it.
I think some of the historical background was that when the United States was formed, and Jeff probably is better at this with his background, we went from 13 colonies to a federal form of government, and then the amendments came up to basically ensure the colonies, the states, that you still are going to enjoy your freedoms. So the First Amendment to the Constitution is this freedom of speech, freedom of religion. So it was to basically hem in the federal government from overstepping. So that was kind of the idea behind it. Now, what we've got, of course, the founding fathers didn't anticipate the internet and all that kind of stuff going on. And so we tend to be crafty in the way that we like to restrict. I think calling something hate speech is really a clever tool, because generally no sane person wants to be attached to anything called hateful. So you got a campus speaker coming on, and he's going to talk about traditional marriage over against the Heinz 57 version of marriages that we're working on nowadays and so forth. And immediately all those who want this freedom of marrying whoever you want, or they tag it as hate speech. We don't want him because it's hate speech. And then you kind of start migrating that thinking towards any religion that talks that way. They participate in hate speech. So Christianity is oftentimes tagged as practicing hate speech. Now, what makes it really super complex is, we'll just talk about Christianity, the wide assortment of Christians who, one church body like our own, which says there's a traditional view of marriage, which we advocate. And then you get others who sometimes even use the name Lutheran, let alone Christian, who will say, well, we permit gay marriage, maybe even trans marriages and other kinds of varieties of it. And now all of a sudden, hate speech is because you hold a minority view. If you believe in traditional marriage and that's deemed a minority view by someone's polling, should you be permitted to have it? Well, I believe the First Amendment very much had that in mind, that minority views were protected. Mm-hmm. And with that kind of protection in mind, you can still talk about the Bible, even if people want to insist it's outdated. Christians, we talk about surrendering in our faith. There are a lot of things in the Bible my evil inclination is constantly fighting against. simplistically, society thinks that all Christians we love everything that God says about us and so forth. No, we're fighting the battle too, but we acknowledge that there's a higher authority.
Bob mentioned hate speech, and I'll follow up with another thing that complicates and confuses things. Is something that's a fairly recent development, but in a way not too surprising, but particularly comes out of the academy. It's the concept that speech is violence. And you hear this a lot on campuses and things like that, but it's made it out into the general culture. The idea that if your speech is hateful and it makes me feel bad, that's the same as if you beat me up. It's the same as if you hit me or knifed me or shot me or something like that. And that therefore since that kind of violence is bad, therefore that kind of speech should also be outlawed or restricted or punished in some way. The problem there, I'm guessing most of our listeners realize this, is you're stealing home base when you only got a single there. It's like, yeah, these things aren't equivalent. Speech is not violence. Violence is its thing. Speech is its thing. Sad thing is it's recently gotten turned around with people also saying, well, violence is a form of speech. And, well, if we have freedom of speech, then we should be free to burn down buildings and loot stores and things like that, because that's just our way of expressing ourselves. And this is a dangerous thing, but we recognize the extremes of that and we say, well, maybe the extremes should be policed in some way. But again, it just gets complicated.
Yeah, I think some of the complication too is maybe what you were getting at was just like a subjective type of thing too. I mean, I think we can all agree somebody yelling fire in a theater or something, okay, like that's not good, but if somebody is saying that a marriage is between a man and a woman, some people are going to think that is personally offending, obviously, like their lifestyle, and they could get really upset about that. Other people think like, well, that's the truth. So, I mean, what's the big deal about that? So it hits people just different ways emotionally. And then that is hard to know then if, well, I mean, like we are clear on something like that, but with other people, just their perception.
I get frustrated because I always feel that when we get into arguments about free speech, that we're not just talking past each other. We're almost like playing with two separate game books. What I mean by I think we talk past each other is that I think Christians, when we talk about Christians being engaged in embracing free speech, there's something ahead of that we're talking about that we take for granted, that we should never take for granted, and that is Christians are knowledgeable about what it means to be a Christian. When you engage in the freedom of speech, it means you know how to use it and you know how to respond to it. Sometimes I feel like, especially in our very charged culture today, that I'm sounding like a Quaker all the time, a pacifist. Because, let your gentleness be evident to all. With correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and gentle instruction. Bill Cosby used to have a comedy album where he used to talk about how a coach used to try to get the team all riled up and, we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to fight, we're going to fight, we're going to win, we're going to fight, we're going to win, we're going to fight. He goes and they charge to the door and the door's locked. It just pulls the air right out of you. And sometimes as Christians, I almost feel like there's something about the Christian instruction, about the way we talk and the way we deal with people, pulls the air out of the way the world wants us to do it. Because in the world, we want to fight, we want to win, we got to win our case, we got to win the vote, we got to have the highest votes, we got to make the biggest case, we got to turn out the largest crowd. And instead, God comes to you like a gentle whisper.
Well, I wanted to talk about like how Christians should think and respond. And you kind of touched on a lot of that, Bob. And also to the role of free speech playing in pro-life and pro-family advocacy. How can we effectively and faithfully use our free speech?
When Jesus was confronted about the paying taxes question, I mean, that was incredible. It was like, well, whose image is on the coin? Give to Caesar that which is Caesar's. Give to God what is God's. And a lot of times when we live in a representative form of government, we kind of, I think, lose track of the fact that ultimately I'm still responsible only for what I do and what I say. So the admonition to let your gentleness be evident to all, I wish other people were a little bit more gentle about the way they did it, and I wish they were. But in the end, I can only control me. The thing to remember is that everything about the Christian faith is about justice and righteousness. That's what it always is. It's reflecting God in everything we do. So justice, righteousness. So what we want to do is you got to have a relationship to practice both. And you don't have a relationship by making the other side constantly angry at you. I just was listening to Albert Mohler has he's the editor for Christianity Today. He's the president, I think, of Southern Baptist Seminary. I was listening to his podcast, and he had Jonathan Haidt on. And I'm a big Jonathan Haidt fan. Jonathan Haidt is an atheist. You have the president of the seminary, and he has an atheist on. But it's interesting, the exchange between the two of them, when you listen to it, how respectful it is. Both using freedom of speech, both challenging each other, but it's respectful. I know that a lot of people say, well, my solution is I don't talk religion because I'm nervous about it. No, just remember what you're really talking about. You're talking about someone who sacrificed it all to save you forever. I don't think when you internalize that, you can keep quiet about it. And all we're talking about is how do you talk about it in a way that even an atheist will sit on the other side of the table and maybe say, I don't agree with you, but they're still willing to come back next week and still talk to you. That's bridge building. That's using freedom of speech in a way that keeps the door open.
We got to remember that if we want to convince somebody to join our side, whether it's a political issue or pro-life, pro-family issue, whatever it is, you're going to have to be able to speak freely to communicate those things. So you're going to value that. But I think, and this relates to some of what Bob was talking about. We should remember that free speech is not just about the ability to stand on a street corner or get on the internet or some TV show or whatever and have a big audience and speak to crowds. Freedom of speech is just as much about the conversations that we have with just one person or a few people. Frankly, those are often the ones that actually make a difference because this is face-to-face, the chance to give and take, a chance to explain this is why this is important to me in a different way. And we shouldn't feel, well, if I don't feel comfortable standing in a crowd and practicing my free speech. Yeah, but you can talk to your friends, you can talk to your family members, and that's where the most effective work is usually done.
How should we respond when opponents of pro-life or pro-family messages use free speech to attack or misrepresent us? Sometimes people feel attacked by what people say. What is maybe something good to think about in those moments where we feel like that?
Well, our first instinct as humans is going to be to do the same because they're doing to us what we don't want done. And we think, well, we should do that back to them. So they understand like, well, that's eye for an eye. That's not the way we function in society with things like this. That was a rule for law from the Old Testament or whatever. But the main thing is, regardless of the situation, regardless of what your level of free speech your society actually has, the main thing is you respond with faith. Faith that God has you and has the situation in his infinitely capable hands, and that he's handling you and handling the situation with his infinite love, patience, and wisdom. You appreciate that God's got you, and suddenly that attack, that silencing, that misrepresentation doesn't loom quite so large. Yeah, this felt really big, but yeah, it's not really that big because whatever it is, God can handle it and God can handle me in this situation. And that's I think really the most important first thing.
Peter had written that we should follow the example of Jesus. And I think a lot about that because I find it interesting in Jesus' interaction with people. When it came to the religious leaders, he could be very harsh. They have the standard of truth, and they were not following it. And so he was always pointing them back to the standard of truth. And then he revealed, I remember the story of rich man and poor Lazarus. The rich man who he was talking about the Pharisees who got completely lost in their practices and their lifestyle and were basically away from the faith, said, well, send back somebody from the dead. And Jesus says, they have Moses and the prophets. If they don't listen to them, they won't listen to anything. And so I often saw when Jesus was harsh with the religious leaders, it was because they already had the foundation of truth and they ignored it. When it came to the people, he says, love your enemy, turn the cheek, walk the extra mile. Everything was sacrificial about it. And I think sometimes we forget that. But when you get to the laity, when you get to people, even people with incredibly strong opinions, a lot of times they're misguided. They don't know the truth. You happen to have the edge. You know the truth. So the question you have to wrestle with, and it has to do with personality and opportunity, is your personality and the opportunity you have. What's the best way to get them into the truth? Now, sometimes there'll be people who are really clever, who could turn the tables around on them and win the intellectual victory. Did that build a bridge? You got to ask that. Did that get them into the truth, or did I just merely win the argument? And like Jeff said, God knows how this is playing out, and he'll accomplish it. Your goal is to be a witness. You want people to marvel at your sacrificial nature and your love, and let Christ rule in your hearts. Peter also said that they may see your good words, and you want them to glorify God in heaven. There's something about the way you live that creates a mystery for them. They want to solve it.
What encouragement would you give to Christians or people that just feel hesitant about speaking up in today's cultural climate?
Repeating, trust God. That's got to be first. And one of the things to trust, Jesus promised that the Holy Spirit would help us when we speak his word. Didn't make quite the same promise for when we speak up to share our opinion on redistricting or anything like that. But when we're speaking for him, when we're representing him, when we're sharing the gospel or sharing the truths that God has given us, he said that the Spirit's going to help you. And we can have confidence of that. I can certainly say, speaking as a pastor, there have been many times where later on I'm like, where did that come from? I said that pretty well, I think. Where did that come from? That was the Holy Spirit. He's going to protect you, and even if there are negative consequences to your speaking, again, he's got you. But I guess a final encouragement there is it's more important to be right than to be popular. And it's more important to say what people need to hear rather than what it feels good to say. As human beings, we want to say things and have people say, yeah, that's right. That's great. Good. You preach it. That's what we want. And sometimes that happens and it's all good. But sometimes we crave the acceptance, the popularity more. And we've got to guard against that. And just remember that when you speak what is true. That's what's more important. When you speak to someone, speak what they need to hear. To edify them, to use the scriptural language, rather than just what makes you feel better for having said it.
And keep perception correct. Be correctly perceive what you're looking at. You watch the news and you see riots in the city over something. You go on to your news feed and your internet, social media, and you see hundreds of thumbs up, thumbs down. You see interesting stories and you see outpouring of opinions on it and everything. And the reality is going back to what Jeff said, your audience generally is not thousands of people. It's not even dozens of people. Most of the time, your most effective audience is one or two. I'll go home at night and I'll watch news and everything. And then you go to work the next day and it's still the same 6 people you interact with most and so forth. And that is your immediate mission field. And don't lose perspective. I mean, people, it's all of a sudden, you see a outburst, and then maybe even in the workplace, you encounter somebody who says, well, I'm not comfortable talking about religion with you anymore. Okay. Then live your faith. You don't have to talk about live it, but still live it in such a loving, compassionate, sacrificial way. The old 1 Peter 3:15. They're wondering about the reason for the hope that you have. There's just something peculiar about you that makes them want to eventually come back. And no matter how poorly they treat you, what an incredible impact you make when you don't treat them the same way back.
There's probably a lot more we could say on this topic, but we appreciate the discussion today. And for all of our listeners, if you have any questions on this topic, please reach out to us at
Express your freedom of speech.
Yeah. Yes, please express your freedom of speech and reach out to us at lifechallenges.us. Thanks a lot, and we look forward to having you back next time.
Thank you for joining us for the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Please consider subscribing to this podcast, giving us a review wherever you access it, and sharing it with friends. We're here to help, so if you have questions on today's topic or other life issues, you can submit them, as well as comments or suggestions for future episodes at lifechallenges.us or email us at podcast@christianliferesources.com. You can find past episodes and other valuable information at lifechallenges.us, so please check it out. For more about our parent organization, please visit christianliferesources.com. May God give you wisdom, love, strength, and peace in Christ for every life challenge.